Hello, and welcome to The Art of Pilgrimage, Going Back to Move Forward, part of the Good Grief Festival. My name is Dr. Liesl Dawson, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol, specialising in literature and the history of the emotions. Julian Barnes has observed that grief dislocates both space and time. The grief-struck find themselves in a new geography, where other people's maps are only ever approximate. Within grief's alien landscape, travelling to places associated with someone you have lost can provide a powerful means of connecting with them. Our panellists today have each gone on their own form of pilgrimage, and they have explored the healing potential of place through their lives, their writing, and art. So I'm really delighted to introduce today's panel. Simon Bray is a Manchester-based artist and creative producer. He is the person behind the wonderful project Loved and Lost, seen by over 3 million people worldwide, which uses audio, photography, and text to explore the complex relationship between memory, place, identity, and grief. Ian Ridley is a writer and sports journalist with 35 years of experience on national newspapers. He's written 14 books, including the #1 bestseller, Addicted, and also The Breath of Sadness on love, grief, and cricket, which has been nominated for Sports Book of the Year. This book describes his grief after the death of his beloved wife, Vicky Orvice, the trailblazing sports journalist. Aisling Musnag is joining us today. She is our very own program curator for the Good Grief Festival, and she's also shaped a number of events and festivals over the years. Aisling travelled to Australia, where she was born and where her father died when she was just 3. Jane Harris is a psychotherapist and filmmaker, and Jimmy Edmonds, her husband, is a photographer, editor, and BAFTA award-winning filmmaker. After the death of their son, Josh, they co-founded the Good Grief Project, and they also co-directed the widely acclaimed, award-winning feature-length documentary, A Love That Never Dies. So welcome. So I'd like to start this panel by inviting each of the panelists to tell their stories and to reflect a little bit on the way place operated for them in terms of their own mourning experience. I'd like to start with Simon, because I think that his project, Loved and Lost, offers a really vivid account of the way that places operate, both in terms of memory and also mourning. So Simon, would you like to tell your story?
Thank you, Lisa. That's great. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here amongst some great company. Thanks to the guys at Good Grief for having me along. I'll show a little bit about Loved and Lost and the premise for the project, and then I think we're going to show you some pictures as well. The project started after I lost my dad. He had prostate cancer and died just over 10 years ago. And I was working as a photographer, and I started the project in about 2013. And the premise is very simple. I wanted to invite people to find a photograph of themselves with someone who passed away, and then invite that person to go back to that location. I would go with them to sort of restage that photograph and record an interview. And that's not a new technique. A lot of photographers have used that technique over the years, and I'm sure many will do again into the future. But what those two images demonstrated was the passing of time, and also the absence. That the second image, obviously, having that space and that gap that's been left behind. And I've worked with over 25 people now through the project, and it's been a real privilege to get to to meet all these people, have conversations about their loss, and very importantly, return to the places. And go back to these locations with people. And for some people, maybe only a very short amount of time has passed, so maybe it's a matter of weeks or months. For others,
Simon, we've got the images for Bex, and I wonder if you want to start sort of telling some of the story of Bex, which we can now see on the screen.
Yeah, sure. So if we could actually have what I was hoping was to have the double image of Beck to start with, just because that sets up the premise of the project. You don't have it? No. Okay, great. It's they're in order. Okay, so we're just going to go with it. So the story I wanted to show you is Beck. And so Beck returned to a hotel in Scarborough with her dad. Took a restage a photograph of her with her dad. And she still lives quite nearby. But we talked in the interview about her going back to the hotel and what it was like to return to a place that she hadn't been to for a long time. So I'll just read a quick quote from her story. It says, "It's weird because this is the first time I've been back, probably not since around the time of the photo, really, but I'll always remember it. It was the only place we seemed to go for occasions with my dad's parents. I think they liked the regalness of it, even though really when you go in, it's this old school 3-star hotel. And now that I've gone back today, it smells the same. The swimming pool's the same. Even some of the staff have been there all that time. It's not somewhere I've been back to, especially now that my granddad and grandma aren't alive. So there's no one to go back with, really. I don't have any bad memories of it at all. I'm very fond of the place." And I found that really interesting because for me, it was her, in this hotel that I'd never been to, but going back to the place evoked an awful lot of memories for her. It's an extremely sensory experience in terms of the sights and the sounds and the smells, and that can evoke a whole load of different things in terms of considering the amount of time that's passed, considering the seasons, the weather, and the sort of evoking the memories of the person in a way that just stopping to think about them, or maybe even just looking at the photographs, might not do. So it's been a real privilege to invite people to go back. And I talked with Beck a little bit about the notion of place and whether places were important to her. And she talks a little bit about his resting place, which I'll share now. So Beck said, "My dad didn't have a grave or a plaque or an ashes scattering due to things to do with family. So I didn't have anywhere to go and pay my respects. So I saved up and got a plaque at the local crematorium. So there's no ashes there, but there is a plaque, just so I could go up and lay some flowers. On anniversaries, I do go up and started putting things that spin around on there. I put my wedding bouquet on there when I got married, things like that. I purely go up on occasions, Father's Day, his anniversary, his birthday. I don't go up just to stand or sit. I don't feel a connection to it all, really. It's just more of an acknowledgement that he isn't here, because I don't feel it was right that when he died there was nothing." And for her, it's obviously it was extremely poignant that there was a place that she could visit that would allow her to remember her dad and engage with the memories of her dad and who he was. She also goes on to talk about the fact that they both really liked music, and there was a special affinity that there was particular music that evoked memories of him. And then I wanted to just move on and share a couple of quotes from another story, from Kyle's story. I don't think we have any pictures, but Kyle, his family's Jamaican, and his granddad passed away. And
I think we lost the sound.
I think Simon's lost connection.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So maybe move on to Ian and then...
Yeah, and just to say, I mean, I think we saw with the images, we saw the way there was the childhood picture with the girl and her father, and obviously that picture you saw after of her recreating that picture, going back to that place and thinking about that moment whilst also recreating it without him, which I think is very beautiful. So if we can then go next to Ian, who's now been, his name says Simon, but Ian, we know it's you. Ian, would you like to jump in and tell your story?
Okay. Yes, my name is Ian Ridley. I lost my wife, Vicky Orvice, to secondary breast cancer in February of 2019, so 21 months ago, just coming up 21 months ago. Vicky was, as has been said, had quite a public profile. She asked me to, she knew she was dying a week before. She asked me to just put something on social media. So I did, and I wrote a tweet about her passing. And at the end of it, I put, "Those who feel the breath of sadness sit down next to me." And it's a line from a song by one of our favorite bands called James. And the song is "Sit Down," that a lot of people may know. And it was retweeted 20,000 times. 7,500 people liked it. 1,500 people replied to me, and I was just staggered by the reaction to Vicky's death, and I couldn't answer everybody. One of the people that did reply to the tweet was Tim James, the lead singer of Tim Booth, the lead singer of James, which was all pretty amazing. And I was caught up in a whirl of Vicky, neither of us expecting. She wouldn't have expected it. I certainly didn't. And then came the funeral. There were 500 people at the funeral, including lots of sports and stars and people from the media. And afterwards, as a lot of people will be familiar, I was left in this vacuum of, what do you do when the people go home, as entertainers find out. I myself have a prostate cancer that had spread, and it spread further 3 months after Vicky died. And I wasn't sure at that time. I was in a very dark place. I wasn't sure if I wanted to have treatment. I'd seen what she'd been through the last year of her life particularly, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go through it all with treatments not working and so on. But I was seeing a very, very good therapist who had been with him for a long, long time. And he said to me, "Why don't you just take 6 months out to think about what you're going to do? Just take the cricket season," he said to me in the April. And I thought, that's a good idea. I've always wanted to go and watch cricket. So I spent the summer going to county cricket, basically. Now, it wasn't until I was invited on this panel that I realised I'd been doing pilgrimage. I just simply wanted to connect with places where Vicky and I had a connection. So I was going to cricket grounds and matches where we'd been before, that meant something to her. For example, she was at university in Leicester. So I decided to go to Leicester for a game. And it's very interesting, Simon talking about Scarborough and seeing that picture, because I stayed in a hotel just near there. And I went to watch Yorkshire play at Scarborough, because Scarborough was where Vicky had her childhood holidays. And amongst the stuff I found after she died was a little 8-year-old's autograph book with all the people that had appeared at the local theatre there. She'd stand at the stage door getting Sooty and Sweep's autograph and everything. So I trod the streets of Scarborough and went to watch cricket. Went to watch Yorkshire play. She was a Yorkshire lass born in Sheffield. And as the summer went on, and there were times when I couldn't stay. There were times I'd booked for 4 days at somewhere and had to go home after 2. So I just wanted to be back in the house where I still felt Vicky's presence very strongly. And I persevered, though. I kept going, and gradually notes began to, I used to write down notes and thoughts about the process I was going through. And I would get panic attacks, I have to admit, sometimes, and need to get home or but the thing about cricket was I was in a crowd if I needed to be, but equally I could be alone if I wanted to be, and I could do a crossword, I could watch cricket, I could just nobody gave me advice. It was there for me if I needed it. I just was able to work my way through. And I've been a football journalist my whole life, but football wasn't appropriate for my process. It was just too noisy. There was just too much clamour. It's very hard to grieve when people are shouting in your ear about the referee being an idiot, It was just gentle. Cricket was gentle, and it matched my mood. And at the end of the summer, I felt like I kind of had a book in me. I'm a writer, and I didn't know what else to do. The prospect of the winter stretching ahead without anything. So I just wrote it, and a book came out of it, which was published in July, trying to write about how cricket and helped me through in many ways. It's by no means a cure. It was by no means a cure, but I found something that was part distraction when I needed it and part focus when I needed it too. And it's funny with pilgrimage. Last summer, Vicky and I used to go back to the same place in the same hotel in Italy every year, which was rare for Vicky because she was a very wide traveler. I wasn't. She would go to Machu Picchu and Myanmar and places in the winter for 10 days, and I'd sit and watch football on TV. But Vicky we would go to this hotel in a little place called Camoli every year. And I didn't feel like going last year. And this summer, now I couldn't go. I felt like going back. And I really want to go back to this hotel. We were the best versions of ourselves on these holidays. And I want to go back. It's one place I can remember her and everything good about it. So maybe next summer. That's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. That's lovely. Simon, did you want to jump back in and sort of finish your story that got cut off?
Yeah, apologies. I think my internet disappeared. I just wanted to sum up really by just sharing Kyle's notion of going back to Jamaica and the fact that for him going back to the place where his sort of family heritage and lineage had begun was something in which he felt, he discovered himself. He'd spent his life feeling like he was sort of reinventing, himself, being second, third generation in the UK. But it was an extremely emotional thing for him to go back to Jamaica and sort of, he said he burst into tears just because everything suddenly made sense. He felt like he suddenly had the beginning of his story that he'd never known before because he'd sort of been to Jamaica, I suppose, and seen where his granddad grew up. And I think that fostered an extremely important part of how he grieved for his granddad after he passed away, and sort of everything began to make sense for him. So that was all really. I was very close to the end when I got cut off, but yes, I think that was all. I think unfortunately we didn't see a double image from the project, but I just wanted to show something very quickly from the book, just so that you've seen it. So that's the original image of my mother and father up down in Winchester, and this is the restaged version of her there. So that's the starting point for every story before we have a conversation. But yes, thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you. Ashleen, would you like to now tell your story?
Sure. Just think it's really hilariously funny that the one call that I'm on had the technical issue. I've been monitoring the technical issues in there with the team all morning. Maybe I was a bit ambitious trying to jump on this. So Simon, Kyle's story is so similar to mine in some ways. So I was 3.5. I was born in Australia. My mum's Irish. My dad was Australian. And my dad died in a car accident when I was 3.5 in Australia. And we had a great life there. He was a really amazing father. And we lived in the sun and we had a great school and everything was very progressive there at the time in Adelaide. Just had a great family around us. But my mum was dreadfully homesick, especially, she was a 27-year-old widow with 2 young children, a baby and a 3.5-year-old, and just completely traumatized by my dad dying in a car crash so suddenly. So she made the decision to bring us back from Australia to Ireland, where her family were and where she could be kind of supported. So we kind of had a double loss. We had the loss of my dad, which was obviously, horrific, and the ripples of that were felt very widely through family and friends. And Jane and Jimmy, I know you really experienced that as well with Josh. It's kind of, it's really hard to get your head around how the resonance of somebody young dying is so, it's really intense. So when we went back to Ireland, I never really felt like I fit in there. I felt, we'd had a very different kind of life in Australia. My dad had always kind of taught me that whatever I had to say was really valid, even as a toddler, that no adult knew better than me, which I was, brave. And so I kind of grew up thinking that I had a voice at the table and that what I said mattered and that I shouldn't always think that adults knew what they were talking about. So I obviously loved Roald Dahl growing up. So when we moved back to Ireland, it was the 80s, and it was very Catholic, and it was very conservative, and I just didn't fit in at all. And in a way, I've thought a lot about this recently, because obviously went back to Australia this year for the first time in 20 years. I kind of also had to fragment myself when we left Australia, because the pain of leaving behind my granny and granddad, everything we knew, our life, my school, my friends, my family, I almost had to just completely compartmentalize that and split off then, and leave that person behind in Australia, and leave that life that I never lived with my dad behind in Australia as well. And I think, that was grand until I got to about 32, and which was the age that I was when my dad died. And all of the grief that I hadn't been able to express or process for that big chunk of my life suddenly started to feel like it happened yesterday. And it was it was a very strange time. I've talked a lot about the fact that my dad's pictures got younger than me, photos of him got younger than me. And I found that really disturbing, because if my dad was younger than me, who was my dad? And so, long story short, went through a very kind of pronounced grief period from 32 to 40. And I hadn't gone home to Australia for this long period of time because I just found it too painful, to be honest. I found it, it was like this life that I never lived. And the pain of that life that I never lived was so great that I couldn't connect with it. I just couldn't be around it. And in that time, I lost contact with my family there because I just couldn't, I found it so difficult to kind of be in touch with them. And so, this year, having started work on a grief festival, you might have heard of it, in December, I felt brave enough to finally go back. And I went back to Adelaide, where we lived together. I went to the beach. I went back to the house that we lived in. I went to his grave for the first time, only second time in my adult life. And it was incredible. It brought about a completely new chapter of my life and immense healing. I think the most pronounced part of that for me was that I have experienced severe fear and terror throughout my whole life because of the way that my dad died and because everything happened in my life so suddenly, from him dying to us leaving Australia, that I've always lived in fear that the rug can be ripped from underneath me at any moment. So, just keep everything very tightly controlled and keep everything, know everything that's happening, cope ahead all the time. And since going back to Australia, it's been really, really amazing. I've kind of started to really let go of that idea of needing to know and befriending my grief and befriending my pain. And through that, definitely coming to some major changes in my relationship with my loss. Just a quick funny story on that. Just before we came into this meeting, I'm desperately claustrophobic, so badly claustrophobic. And I think it's actually part of that kind of terror around being trapped in grief and being trapped in places that I don't really want to be in. And I got locked in the toilet before we came on. And I sort of would normally have had a complete panic about it and, spun out, and I wouldn't have been able to do this session because I would have been too disturbed. But I was just chatting to myself, saying, you can find it. So I think that kind of almost, Lisa was here chatting to me and I said, oh my God, that's normally I'd be completely freaking out. So something has obviously changed. So going back to reconnect with the place that all of these traumatic things happened in, but also I had to go through that to be able to remember the love and the incredible connections and, reconnecting with my amazing family in Australia, my aunts, all of my dad's friends. It was healing for them as well because I was a connection to him and, we'd lost touch for such a long time. So that's kind of my story. I went back for the first time in February, I think directly as a result of working on this festival, which, kind of comes full circle.
That's brilliant. Brilliant, Aisling. Thank you so much. Such a moving story and very inspirational. Jane, can we move on to you, please, and hear your story?
Yes, and thank you. It's so fantastic to be part of this. I loved what Aisling was saying about fear. There's always fear when you're doing something like this, but fear kind of leads us on. And in a way, the pilgrimage that we took was to go back to the place where our son had died. We didn't get to say goodbye to him. And when he died, the trauma was so multi-layered, the shock was so great. All we wanted to do as a family was huddle together in our living room. We had to keep our eyes on each other. We couldn't be separate. The fear was, what if something might happen to Jimmy? What if something might happen to our other kids? So we huddled together, and then the funeral had to be organized, which was really cathartic and very important to create a ritual, but impossibly challenging. And after the funeral, well, there's that sort of awful vacuum that Ian mentioned, I think. And we kind of decided at that point that we were going to carry on doing what we've always done, which is try and make films about life events that have impacted us. And we had this idea that we were going to go back to the place where Josh had died, but we weren't ready to do it together. And we knew we had to do it together as a family. And that took 2 years for us to be ready to go together and also to begin to make a film about it. And that was just interesting for us as a family, how different we were and how different everybody is in their grief. That nobody grieves like anyone else. And, you know, our kids were looking after us, we were looking after our kids, we're all keeping an eye on each other, we're all full of fear. And yet this plan was hatching. And the pilgrimage was something that we built up to really slowly, really gradually, very differently. Jimmy would have gone straight away. Jimmy would have been there the day after. Myself and my daughter.
As soon as we got the news via a couple of policemen that turned up on our door that Josh had died in Vietnam, it's coming up to 10 years now in January. But at the very first moment that we had that news, and after I picked myself off the floor, literally, I said I wanted to go to Vietnam. I wanted to go to the place where he had lost his life immediately. When our undertaker came round and we had to negotiate how it was that you repatriate a body, I said, I'm going to come with you. I'm going to come with you to Vietnam. But he actually had organised undertakers in Hanoi to do the job. And then I said, okay, well, at least I'll come with you to the airport to pick him, to pick him up. All I wanted to do at that moment in time was to be with Joshua. Whether he was dead or alive, I just wanted to be with him. I just needed to be in his presence somehow or other. And the distance of Vietnam to UK, what is it, 6,000 miles or something? I mean, it was horrendous. That distance, that physical geographic distance, it just sort of underscored the distance between us now as father and son. And I had to find some way or other to sort of recoup my sanity, if you like, as a result.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, the different ways we did it? Because for me, I just wanted to be warm and safe and by a fireplace, or, with the kids, I had to have my eyes on them. But I was so fearful of going to that place and being where Josh had been. And the whole journey has been a bit like Aisling was saying earlier, in a way, you've got to embrace your fear if you want to move forward in your grief. But the fear and the terror and the trauma is so paralyzing and catastrophic in those early days. And you think it will never change. But of course, what we've learned is that through making films, through writing, through being creative and active, we've been able to, I suppose, come to terms with the reality of this, and the traveling was part of that creative process.
I think the traveling back to Vietnam 2 years later, because as Jane was saying, it did take us, that amount of time to get together as a family to agree that we were all in the right place to be able to do this, and that was extremely important that we did it as a foursome, because Josh has a brother and a sister. And that was, I think it was Julia Samuel that said the other day that, the love that you have lost when somebody who's close to you has died is made up by the love that you have in the relationships that you have around you, from the people who are living. And for me, that's a really poignant way of describing how one can manage how you can manage your way out of those first initial horrendous pain of that loss, by embracing the love that is around you and the love that you still have to give to those that are other members of your family or your friends.
It's almost
and
a
so
survival thing.
yeah, exactly. That business then of having decided to go back to Vietnam was effectively the catalyst for the next stages in the way in which we were dealing with Josh's death. After the films came after that, you see.
So, A Love That Never Dies, obviously, the title's in the film. And actually, I suppose we didn't know how we were going to hang on to the reality of our son's life and his death. But by making that film, which I think you're going to show a clip of, you know, that was a process of not only sharing our story, but really absorbing other people's stories, hearing other people's stories of survival and hope, because of course this whole festival is about hope, in my view. You know, to see so many people from so many walks of life and different experiences coming together to share their grief moves me so much, and it fills me with so much hope, because when you're grieving, you feel alone, and you are alone because you represent this cursed contagion that is pain, and that is a very lonely place. So a festival like this, I think, is a great joiner and a very hopeful thing.
We have a sense of before and after a cataclysmic event.
I remember that last hug when he left. Big, tall, strong young man going off out into the world for 6 months.
We are, I wouldn't say trying to turn the clock back, however much we would want to turn the clock back, but we are always looking back to that huge moment. Scroll back, reverse, undo, just get back to the moment before that happened. Get back to the moment in which, you know, Josh was riding along on his motorbike and that guy didn't step out in front of him.
Okay, so I could have odds jobbed the tire on here, see how this works out. Might be a chance the camera might actually just totally fall off, but yeah, see how it goes.
It's lovely.
So
do you want to? Jane and Jimmy, do you want to offer any final words about the film? Pick that up.
Yeah, well, going back to Vietnam was remarkable. We were met with the most incredible hospitality, and the people who had been at the scene of the incident came to meet us. They took time out, they hosted us, they looked after us, they wanted to take us to the exact spot where our Josh had died. We were ready to go there, but we were fearful, and every step of the way, their hospitality and warmth, because in Vietnam, it seems everybody knows how to grieve, which is another story, but they were alongside us, and they held our hands metaphorically and took us to the place. They were really worried it had to be the precise place. It didn't matter to us where the precise place was, but they walked up and down the road saying it was here, it was here. A woman in the field had remembered it. And the teacher who had been the translator for the other boys who were with Josh when the incident happened, he told us that he goes back there regularly and he takes a cake so that Josh won't be lonely, and he places it by the side of the road. And I think it filled us with hope, you know, this idea that people could give so much who knew nothing of us, our kind of insignificant lives, but they were so positive and able to get alongside us that we traveled back to that place and they were there. And that was really healing. It felt enveloping, didn't it, Jimmy? There was something really solid.
I mean, I think that people think of pilgrimage as sort of going back to remember. And sure enough, that's what we did. We went back to Vietnam, to the exact spot where Josh died, in order to make his death real for us. But it's also, it's all about learning something new as well. So I'm an atheist as far as I'm concerned. Josh is dead. He's no more. Yet for the people that had been there at the time of the accident and who then started to recount what had happened to us when we met them, they are firm believers in the afterlife. And the way in which we could then sort of interact with people was a wonderful learning curve, really, to expand a sense of how it is that we can relate to people across all sorts of boundaries, whether or not they're sort of metaphorical or physical. I mean, it was a great experience. So we came back with more than a sense of this is where Josh died. We came back with a sense of that there's other cultures out there, if you like, that we've been invited into, and it was great.
But it also made it real, because in a way, and this is so topical right now with COVID, because so many people are not with their loved ones when they die, and that's a terrible thing. You want to be able to be alongside people, and so ritual becomes more important than ever. For us, going to that roadside was really important, creating a ritual, putting flowers or a cake there. It doesn't matter maybe, and this is up for discussion, whether it's a month after the death or 2 years after the death, but we can all possibly do something when we're ready. And that's very relevant to what we're all living right now with this nightmare, this sort of bereavement epidemic, this grief monster that's taking over our lives with so many deaths, so much pain and loss.
It's lovely. I'm really struck in listening to your stories at the way that going to these places seems to do sort of two opposite things. It seems to both conjure the presence of the person who's been lost, but also it sort of confronts you with the reality of their death. And I was, Jane and Jimmy, saying you kind of needed to go there to believe it. And I'm kind of interested in this oscillation, if that's part of the point of place, if it's, both facing kind of the sad reality of the absence while still somehow finding the presence through that. Would you say?
Well, can I jump in here? I at the same age that Josh was when he died, I had a bad road accident in which my girlfriend died. I was 21, she was 22. It was a pretty horrendous time, because the car that we were in fell into a river. She couldn't swim, I could. I got out, she drowned, but I never saw her again. I never saw her again because her body was never found until 2 weeks later, by which time I had traveled back home. This was in Yugoslavia, in the old Yugoslavia. And from that moment on, because I'd never seen her, her death for me was never really real. And I would have fantasies and imaginations about people that I saw on the other side of the street, thinking that it was her, and thinking, oh my God, she just left me. She's not, she's pretending she's pretending to be dead, but actually she's still alive and she just left me. And it was just like sort of just weird stuff that was going on in my head as a young man at that time. But the point was that as a result of that, I don't think that I was able to absolutely consciously, get hold of the fact that Gillian had died. Mm-hmm. And that as a result of that, my grieving, if you like, was in a sort of stasis. It was in a sort of abeyance. I was in a kind of grievous purgatory whereby, I could neither accept the fact that she was dead nor move forward. And interestingly, I was given I had some work in Belgrade, must have been about 2003 or something like that. So after the contract, I took a ride down to the place where we'd had this accident. It was a place called Mostar in Bosnia. And went to the place, And the place completely changed. The river was still there, but the road was very, very different. It was now a 2-lane highway and all the rest of it. And I just walked to the spot by the side of the river there, kind of imagining that this was the place, but never quite sure. But because I was on my own, I couldn't kind of relate that to anybody, and it didn't really mean that much to me. It did in a way, but not massively. And I'm not sure that it actually really helped. But so in comparison to when we went back to Vietnam with the rest of the family, and we were all doing it together, and we could talk about it at the time in the lead up to and the aftermath of actually going to the spot. It all then, because because we were dealing in that reality in relationship with one another, it all became far more palatable, but also much more meaningful. Much more meaningful.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, it does remind me, I've written down, Julie Samuels makes the point, we need to find a way to understand and live with the central paradox, that we must find a way of living with a reality that we don't want to be true. And it does strike me that the kind of pilgrimage structure sort of works very well for trying to confront that reality in some ways.
I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Ian a little bit about addiction and your own experience in terms of how that helped you with grief, and also the sort of role. One of the things about your book, which I really liked, is the fact that as well as grieving and kind of looking at that in the face, you also recognize that denial's also an important part of the grief process. And I just wondered, if you could say a bit more about that, because I think, yeah.
Sorry, I put myself on mute again there. Sorry about that. It is fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I can be a bundle of laughs sometimes. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm 32 years sober now. And unlike Jimmy and Jane, I wanted to go everywhere on my own. We all, as they said, we all do these things differently. And I wanted to be on my own. I wanted to feel all this stuff on my own. I didn't want anyone around me. And that's just me. I'm a bit of a loner anyway. I'm a bit of a hermit because I'm a writer, I guess. But yeah, there was a while during the latter stages of my drinking where I kind of knew I was an alcoholic and this was doing me no good and it was ruining the lives of people around me. But I wasn't ready to do the necessary stuff yet. I wasn't quite mentally, emotionally prepared that I needed to be abstinent. I went through all this of trying to control my drinking, and it didn't work until I was absolutely beaten and hammered and ready to quit. I was not going to make any progress, and come to see that there was only one way for me, and that was to not drink one day at a time. So in some ways, denial cut me off from the reality and the pain of it all. And I felt in my grief at times where I needed to go through that too. It was just so overwhelming. It was just so scary. Jane talked about fear. I'm always reminded that the opening line of C.S. Lewis, A Grief Observed, is nobody ever told me that grief would feel so much like fear. And I didn't realize that. I mean, I've said it before, I expected the sadness, but I didn't expect the madness of grief. And sometimes that madness was so powerful, the panic attacks, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do without her? Somebody said it earlier, I just wanted to rewind. Jimmy was talking about, I wanted to find that moment, and I want to go back when we both first met and do it differently and try it again and stop arguing this time and have more time together and, not sit on different sides of the room together, but cozy up and watch a movie instead of, doing different things. So denial was an important thing. And the other thing I've learned through addiction, the little slogans that help you, one day at a time, this too shall pass. Sometimes you just want to, when you see those things, and I keep little things around the house of things like that, I just want to rip them up or smash them sometimes. Other times I think, yeah, that's right. Easy does it, but do it is another thing I learned. And I guess all the stuff I've learned of being in a 12-step fellowship, I've tried to apply to my grief as well. So yeah, that's kind of...
I think that's fascinating, and it does fit with the sort of dual model of grief, where you're supposed to move between sitting with your grief and also, you know, doing things about your own survival and kind of getting on with life. So that does make perfect sense. Aisling, I was interested to hear your story again. I think it's an amazing story. And I'm interested in the way that for you going back involves this sort of re-encounter with your father. And I think sometimes when you've lost a father, there is a kind of renegotiation of that relationship, a thinking through of that relationship. It's sort of, you know, that they are dead, but the relationship continues. And I'm interested to know how that trip changed that relationship with your father, but also how it changed your sense of self.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think I've spoken to you, Lisa, that I felt like I took him with me on that trip. And I felt like it was as much for him as it was for me in some ways. I felt like it was really important. Well, you know, I missed my family over there dreadfully anyway. And I sort of really lamented the loss of contact with them over the years. But I felt like it would have been tragic for my dad as well to know that we weren't in contact. You know, the most important people in his life, the people he loved most, you know, no longer were kind of in intimate relationship with each other. So, yeah, I definitely felt like I took him with me on that journey, and I felt him with me, you know, the whole time I was there at the places that I went back to, that we shared time together. Yeah, but I definitely renegotiated my relationships with my family there, for sure. It was a completely different kind of relationship because I was coming as an adult instead of a child or a teenager. I was a teenager the last time I was back there, so I was a horror. I was a nightmare. And this time I was coming back as a woman. And I think the big takeaway from me was that I so desperately wanted to still be somebody's little girl until I did that trip. And so I had kind of kept myself suspended in a lot of ways in that idea of being the little girl. And I've leveled up since I got back, for sure. I started a pension, which was quite surprising to my whole family. And yeah, just kind of stepping into, I even hated being called a woman because it made me feel less connected to my dad, because he was kind of a boy when he died, really, you know, kind of like just coming into his manhood. So yeah, I think that would be the big thing for me, is that I stopped being daddy's little girl after that trip, and I kind of started to step into, you know, being a 41-year-old woman, which is long overdue and welcome, I think.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I am struck by what you said about taking your father with you, and the fact that going to Australia was something that we're sort of doing for him as well as you. And it does strike me that in our culture, we have few ways of doing loving things to those who've died. I think, you know, we love them, and we might have a need to take care of them and do gestures. And actually in Ian's book, one of the most touching moments is after Vicky's died, where he brushes her hair. And it's a beautiful moment. And again, it's an act of love and caretaking. And, you know, and I feel like there's not enough opportunities for us to do loving things for the people we've lost. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true. And I think for me, it was also about, I was going back for the whole family. It was kind of bringing the two families back together again, my family in Ireland and my family in Australia. And, you know, my amazing mom, who, you know, just was so kind of there with me every step of the way, you know, calling me every day, texting me every day, where are you going? Who have you seen? So she was almost there with me as well. I had both of my parents there with me in a way that they can't ever be there for me like that again together.
Oh, that's lovely. The other question I've been thinking about a lot, especially with Simon and Jane and Jimmy and Ian as well, is the role that creativity plays in grief. Because it does seem to me that that's quite a crucial aspect of the grief process. I think we also want to take some questions too, I think, from the audience. I've just had someone come in to remind me of that. But maybe we could say a few words about creativity's role in the grief process, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Well, for me, it's about doing and making new things. And I think that people have responded to grief throughout the ages, in all sorts. I mean, some of the best art comes from the greatest pain, and I'm not sure that's not just what we're actually doing. When we went back to Vietnam, it was very natural just to take out a camera. It was a very small camera, and quite unobtrusive, and there was no sense in which it was actually going to become a film for the public to watch or anything like that. It was just a question of recording what we were doing as a family. It was a home movie, and I think that's a great starting point for anybody, for any experience, is just to get that camera out and start recording it, because you never know what it might turn into. The extra bit afterwards is how you then incorporate that into a piece of a work of art, if you like. Is a much more considered thing, but for us, for me particularly, it's just a business of I mean, a bit like a writer, I guess, in the sense in which you diary, and then 2 or 3 years later you go back and look at the stuff and produce something that is available for an audience rather than just for your own recollection.
That's great. I'd love to have you answer, Simon, but I think I should move on to the questions because I think we're running out of time. Sorry about that. Yes, and just to respond to you, Jimmy, this sort of art project also makes me think of, again, Julia Samuels, who I've been reading over and over again, but her sense that one therapeutic thing to do is to externalize your relationship in some way. And that can be wearing clothes, but it also can be the art object, which is about integrating that person and that loss. So we've had some really great questions. I like this one a lot. Is pilgrimage during grief always about going to a physical space? Could pilgrimage be through music or art rather than places? Thoughts?
Well, one of the chapters in my book is I went to a cricket match, and at the end of the cricket match, they played a song that triggered something in me. So I went home, and the next day was the 6 month, marked the 6 months since Vicky died. And I spent the day playing songs that had meant things to us. Went through our record collection, her record collection. I wrote a chapter in the book about that. So music, yeah, it takes me to a place. It features a lot in my book. Song titles. Unfortunately, when you quote lyrics they cost a fortune in books, so you can't quote lyrics. But I allude to them in the book. Yes, it was a huge thing for me, definitely music.
And I would, go on, Jane.
I was just going to say that for us, I think doing and being active was an act of survival. Actually, once we'd finished huddling in the warmth in front of the fire, we had to get active. And I actually found running to be really helpful, particularly when I least wanted to do it, because I actually don't like running. But I realized that when I least wanted to do it is when I had to do it most, and it kind of cleared my head. And I'd have these moments of clarity in my despair after my runs. And I kept a diary of my running thoughts. And it was really helpful because, when your son dies or your child dies or your partner dies, you do feel hopeless. You do feel so lost. You think it's all back to front and it's all in the wrong order of things. But just by being physically active or creatively active, it gives you a purpose. And it's almost like you have to force yourself to do it.
Yes, it also strikes me that music and places are kind of sensory ways that we go back to memories. Smells are very powerful as well. So I would think that there's a kind of embodied aspect of memory that all of these could be used to invoke, and that, they kind of all could be pilgrimages of sorts.
Yeah, I think books as well. I
Yeah.
think when somebody has, my dad was a big reader, and I inherited a lot of his books. And every time I pick up one of his books to read, it really feels like an act of devotion. And yeah, so I think physical things and creativity are really, really important.
Every time I turn Ronnie Size on, it takes me off.
Yeah.
Okay. So he taught me the difference between jungle and drum and bass. I've forgotten it, but
So we've also had the question, do you think we can consciously make a pilgrimage of grief? For example, can we plan to take someone with us when we are mourning, or does it just happen? I think I'll know what you're going to say, but I'm interested to hear it.
Well, I certainly consciously took my dad with me when I was going on my pilgrimage, but bear in mind, I planned mine for 20 years. So, a lot of detail went into that. So personally, yes, but I suppose, yeah, it'll be really interested to hear. Simon, do you have anything to say on that?
I suppose for me, in terms of the project, people are taking a photograph in a sort of representation of somebody with them back to a place. And so there's a sort of revisiting in a sort of memory sense, but also in terms of sort of the restaging of the photograph in order to make something new. We've talked a lot about sort of doing. But yeah, I think I like the notion of sort of carrying somebody with you and sort of showing them anew that something might have changed. Acknowledging the passing of time. And I mean, I know that if I'm going somewhere that evokes memories of my dad or my sister, that actually you might sort of open your mouth and express something and acknowledge that the trees are changing through autumn or something like that, and sort of you feel like that presence is there because you're in a certain place. It's giving you permission to embrace the emotions, embrace the memories, embrace the loss. Yeah.
I remember being at cricket at Scarborough and at the tea interval watching a man with 3 pints of beer, with his hands around 3 pints of beer, walking along the outfield, and he was guarding them, and he'd got about 40 yards, and suddenly someone bumped into them, and he'd nursed them so carefully, and all the beer went everywhere. And I just heard Vicky in my ear laughing. I just heard her sitting next to me. She would have laughed so much, and I could hear that she had a flat Yorkshire vowel, and she'd have just gone, ha! She pointed it out to me.
I think the idea of the sort of continuing bonds thing, you fold your loved ones in a warm, comfortable place within yourself. Josh is always with us now. It's nearly 10 years. But when we went to the Grand Canyon and we were filming and interviewing all these families across America when we were making A Love That Never Dies, we had his ashes with us. And everywhere we went, in fact, that photograph is of me throwing Josh's ashes, some of his ashes into the Grand Canyon, literally. But it's the passing of time that makes it possible to bring someone with you wherever you go, to the point where you don't have to go anywhere anymore because they're with you. And the continuing bonds idea is actually really helpful, really comforting.
But what Simon's saying there about taking a photograph, right? Taking a photograph with you, taking that to the spot, and all of the work that you're doing anyway, is I don't know. I think that's a something that it really does. It kind of, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say here, but it just feels like we have photographs and they are life image. They are so realistic images of our Josh when he was alive, that when we take him with us on any trip, and sometimes we had a business card that has his photo on it, and we'd leave that in various places, just in case somebody else found it and sort of continued the story with their sort of like, well, what's going on here? They just invent their story about what it would be about. It's a way of just getting, not just keeping him alive, but keeping our relationship with him alive. And I don't know.
Well, just very quickly to say that Josh's friends, still send postcards to Josh. We have over 100 postcards that have been sent to Josh, written in the present tense. One arrived just the other day from India saying, Josh, miss you, mate, love you. I'm here, you're here with me. Now that's his young friends who were 22 when he died. He's now 32. Isn't that amazing? In the present, they write to us unashamedly, and it fills us with joy. And it might bring a tear to our eyes, but it's a tear of happiness. And I love that idea that you can be in the present like that, and share something so unashamedly. And for our young folk, that's really important.
Absolutely. And it's kind of keeping his story going. And I think so much of what one wants to do is keep the person who's lost alive and present, you know. And so a lot of these journeys and the art is a way of kind of ensuring that you have those continuing bonds, but also articulating it to the world. You know, this person is still a presence for us. I think that we are just about out of time, but I feel like we've covered a huge amount of material, and I've absolutely loved hearing all of your stories, which are so moving and inspirational. So I just want to thank you again for joining this session, The Art of Pilgrimage, and to everyone watching, thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Bye-bye.